before Jesus came, all religions were an attempt to know God, but nobody could really know him. Everyone was doing their best guess. They were applying their best guess to who they thought God was. And so when something miraculous would happen, they would idolize that thing because they did not understand it. You need to introduce doubt in order to represent truth. How do you prove that Jesus is the only way to God without quoting the Bible? Because when we meet people from different faiths, we want to tell them in John chapter this it says this, in Romans chapter this it says this. They don't care. They don't believe the Bible. So how do you use the Bible to prove to them that the Bible is real? And one day, a group of people approach him. You can imagine Paul is preaching in the streets, preaching Jesus, his death, his resurrection, and all of a sudden it says a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Now, the fact that they're debating with him means that they must have heard what he was saying. And as they heard as he was speaking, says some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? You will not understand why they will say that if you do not understand who Epicurean and Stoic philosophers are. The Epicurean philosophers were people who believed in your feelings. Like they were very into happiness is based on how you feel. Happiness is found in pleasure and avoiding pain. You can do the research on your own, but that was their mindset. That was their philosophy, that life life has been designed for you to attain the highest form of pleasure without experiencing pain. Does that sound familiar today? They believed that there was a God, but God wasn't interested in the affairs of men. And so you can imagine them hearing Paul preaching a message that God has come down. God now resides in us. They're like, what is this guy trying to say? Now, the Stoic philosophers were the direct opposite. They believe that happiness is found in virtue, in discipline. It's not just about feeling happy and avoiding pain. No, pain has a purpose. You need to be able to control your emotions. They believed in rationalism and logic. And so, there's a verse I put here that I'm sure I put for a reason. 1 Corinthians 2, yes. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 14. So you can imagine when they said that, who is this babbler and what is he saying? 1 Corinthians 2:14 says, the person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit. And so they could not understand what Paul was saying. It sounded like foolishness to them because they did not have the Spirit. So he says, after they asked him, others remarked, says he seems to be advocating foreign gods. So they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, which is like a tribunal. It's a place where people come to debate new ideas. And they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean. And it says all the Athenians and the foreigners who live there spend their time doing nothing but talking about listening to the latest ideas. These people are just like people today who just sit down and watch the news. We just want to know what is new, what is new, what is new. What are you doing with what you already know and what you've already heard? They wanted to know this strange teaching. It is obvious that they valued knowledge, the knowledge that would make them look wise, or the information that will make them knowledgeable but not make them wise. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. A doctor who smokes is a person who is knowledgeable but isn't wise, because even though they know what to do, they're not actually doing it. So these people, they loved information but did not know the purpose for which the information they were given was for. There are a lot of people like that. Or you know what to do, but you're struggling to do what you know. You become an ivory tower of knowledge. You know everything. You keep on reading. You keep on looking for the next information to grab instead of actually doing what you already know. There are two types of knowledge. There's the knowledge that is information. There's the knowledge that comes through experience. Both produce knowledge, but knowledge on a different level. And so I sort of could relate with Paul here, because they are asking Paul, and these are philosophers, these are people who are knowledgeable, they are smart people according to the world standards. They have a lot of information. They don't subscribe to the Jewish religion, the Jewish message. How do you preach to someone who doesn't believe what you believe? The reason why Paul could confidently go into the Jewish synagogues is because the Jewish people in there had been studying the Torah. They had been hearing the messages over and over again. So the barrier to entry was little. I'm literally going to tell you what you already know, but give you a different revelation from it. But how do you evangelize to people who do not even know what the Torah said? They have no background, no historical context for the message that you're about to give to them. It is why I did a video where I'm like, how do you prove that Jesus is the only way to God without quoting the Bible? Because when we meet people from different faiths, we want to tell them in John chapter this, it says this, in Romans chapter this, it says this. They don't care. They don't believe the Bible. So how do you use the Bible to prove to them that the Bible is real? That's the dilemma that Paul is facing here. And you're going to see why he changes his message. He doesn't quote scripture. Verse 22, because in order for you to reach these kinds of people, you need to connect with them first before you can correct them. Verse 22, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." Someone else can come with another personal experience that you will not be able to dispute. And they experienced it. You cannot argue with their experience. They experienced it. We have to go beyond personal experience to giving them practical facts and truth to prove why we believe what we believe. It says, "I know you are very, not just religious, but you're very religious." And it says, "For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription." So he's trying to connect with them that I'm not just a random person who just doesn't, like, I've been around. I can tell that you guys are religious. I've been around to see that, you have objects of worship. I can see idols. This is how you connect. You have to go in to understand where these people are coming from. It is why some of the most powerful apologetics today, people who defend the Christian faith, they have read the other books. They have read the Quran. They know about Hinduism. They know about all these other religions, not for the purpose of applying them, but for the purpose of understanding them well enough to see the flaws in those belief systems, so that when they are interacting with people who believe it, they are able to connect. They are able to present it in a way that will introduce doubt you need to introduce doubt in order to represent truth. Please also know the Bible well enough before you do that, because as you are correcting them, they are also going to be inquiring about your belief system. You need to have a response for why you believe what you believe. Paul didn't just go here. Paul was filled before he started this. So he says, "I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription." Now he has seen a gap that he can explore. How is it that you guys have so many? He's telling them, you know so much, but there's also something that you do not know. He says, "There are so many objects of worship here. However, I also found an altar with the inscription that says, 'To an unknown God.'" He found a gap of ignorance in their practice. Because think about it, all religions before Jesus came, all religions were an attempt to know God, but nobody could really know him. Everyone was doing their best guess. They were applying their best guess to who they thought God was. And so when something miraculous would happen, they would idolize that thing because they did not understand it. I heard someone say the other day that if today we have a camera today, if we could go back in time and take a picture of Pharaoh and show Pharaoh that, bro, this is what you look like yesterday, they would have deified you. They would have turned the camera into a god, because ignorance was met with worship back in the day. Whenever you introduce something that spooked people, they called it God because they did not understand. It was a fresh revelation that they were not acquainted with. It's why when Paul and Barnabas, or was it Paul and Silas? Maybe Paul and Barnabas, when they healed a man who was lame, they wanted to turn them into gods. They're like, we haven't seen this before. What? So they had created so many objects of worship based on their ignorance of who God was, to the point that they had something that happened on the land where they are like, we don't even know who to attribute this thing to. Let's just put an unknown God. We don't even know who to attribute what just happened. It was such a supernatural event that they're like, we're going to worship an unknown God. And Paul saw that as a gap. He says, you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you. He says the God, he's trying to decode this unknown God that they've been worshiping but do not know. He says the God who made the world. You see, everybody can relate with the world. And you're going to see why I say that. Everybody can relate with the world. That was the revelation that God gave me when I was asking him, like, how do I explain explain and convince people that Jesus is the only way without quoting the Bible. They don't believe the Bible. In Romans, it says that through creation, we can know the Creator. So Paul is saying the God who made the world and everything in it, he has left clues behind. It's the same way when you see a painting. Someone who is very knowledgeable about paintings doesn't need to know who painted what. From the painting, they can deduce who the painter was, because every painter has their signature. Every painter has their style. Connoisseurs, that's the word I was looking for. They're painting connoisseurs who are able to deduce just by looking at the creation to know who the creator. So Paul is saying here that the God who made the world and everything in it, like if you only could study creation, you would see his signature. You'll be able to know who he is. He says, and if you really knew that, and you know that he does not live in temples built by human hands. I mean, come on. A lot of the things didn't even make sense. Like the God who created this world, you now create a temple in one location and you're like, he's there. Like come on. It says, and he's not served by human hands. He created you. How, like, it says as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him, how many times have we read this verse? For in him we live and move and have our being. Do you realize that Paul was actually quoting a philosopher? This wasn't God speaking. Check this. This was a quote from the Cretan philosopher Epimenides. That was a shocker for me. I'd always read this thing. Oh, for him we live, we move. Although it is aligning with God, but the original quote was actually from a Cretan philosopher. Even the next one, it says, as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. So it's even bringing their attention to the fact that even some of your poets have written that we have to have been the offsprings of this God. Offspring means that you are his child. You are a product of him. For in him we live, we move, and we have our being. The God who created this world, just by looking at creation, you can understand who he is. Just by looking at creation, you know that whoever created this world is organized. Whoever created this world is principled. Whoever created this world is intentional. There's a purpose behind everything. Nothing was made random. There was intention behind every creation. When I had my first child, that freaked me out to see a baby being formed in another person's womb. There was a time when I touched my wife's belly and my son in there punched it. I was like, what? There's life. If this life was random, if the creator was random, people would be giving birth at different times. It will not be 9 months, 99% of the time. Think about that. Every animal has their own gestation period. Every seed has its own, everything is structured. And because we know that, afterlife makes sense. Because we know that the God who created this earth, and because we know that he's very intentional and purposeful, what we are doing on the earth cannot be a random occurrence. What we are doing here is preparation for what we will do after. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this clip and you want to know how to hear from God using the Bible, I'd love to invite you to a live Bible study session that is happening every single day, Monday to Friday, 5 to 6 p.m. EST, where I show you how to not just read the Bible for information, but how to meditate on it for revelation. Because revelation is the key to your transformation. Take care. Bye-bye.